Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing yet another Halloween build, because it is that time of the month, and I want to get a little bit spooky. Continuing the theme of last video, we are going to be reflavoring the origin characters into some classic horror characters, and today we are turning Karlach into Frankenstein. Now, I think Karlach is a good fit for Frankenstein, whereas Frankenstein was a creature created from various different parts put together by a mad scientist, let's just say. Karlach was ripped apart and put together, back together again I should say, by some crazed infernal engineers, so there's kind of a bit of synergy there. Also, Frankenstein is a big, strong dude. So is Karlach. Obviously, there's a lot of differences between how Frankenstein is portrayed in pop culture as to his original incarnation, and I have taken inspirations from both with a little bit of fantasy superpower flavouring to make it a viable build, and I think the build that I've got today is really, really fun. Obviously, I had to put my own little twist on like kind of the Frankenstein look for Karlach. You'll see in the combat footage that I originally had a hairstyle that was a bit more faithful to the original, but I thought it looked terrible, so I made some changes since then, and I think there's a lot of unique and interesting details with the character that actually kind of do make sense for like a Frankenstein-inspired kind of look, but without actually 100% being the character. And I think overall, Karlach and Frankenstein are a good fit for each other. Goodness me, I can't even get my words out today. Whereas Gale, being Jekyll and Hyde, was also a pretty good fit. So I'm quite happy with how this turned out. The overall goal of this build was just to kind of make a fun thematic build that worked for Karlach, kind of on the theme of the character. So where Jekyll and Hyde was a lot more literal, with it being, you know, like having the barbarian's rage to do both sides of kind of the coin there for the personality shift, as well as, you know, having the transmutation wizard for the, you know, the potion brewing and such like that. You know, all that pretty much worked really, really well. But obviously Frankenstein is a bit different. You kind of have to come up with a unique kind of skill set that would work for both characters, Karlach and Frankenstein, where there wasn't really a superpower or like kind of fantasy build already kind of existing there. So I do think I kind of had to take some creative liberties with this one just to kind of make something that at least I think worked. And I think I've come up with something that you guys will definitely enjoy. So without further ado, let's get into the build. Obviously, we are a tiefling because we are playing as Karlach. Now, obviously, normally this doesn't really make much of a difference for the build. However, there is some things I wanted to point out. Karlach, with her race, is going to get access to fire resistance, which is nice, and dark vision. That's just fine. But for our sub-race, which is our Zariel tiefling, we get access to thaumaturgy. And I really kind of like this for a Frankenstein build, because Frankenstein is a very intimidating character anyway, but not necessarily intentionally, right? So I have the feeling that like thaumaturgy basically accidentally going off, as per like not really having control over our magical abilities, is actually kind of interesting. So giving us advantage on intimidation and performance checks, mainly intimidation, feels right for this build. As for our starting class, you have the option to go with this or our multi-class, but we are going to be playing as a monk today, which may seem strange. Obviously, I've built Karlach as a monk before for various different reasons, but going monk for Frankenstein may seem a bit strange. Well, to my understanding, Frankenstein doesn't really have any sort of signature weapon that he would use, nor is he really a magic caster either. So it kind of made sense to go with a big, strong, unarmed kind of brute-type fighter, almost like a pugilist, with a bit of flavouring that, again, I'll get into in a minute. So I do think monk works. Again, it is going to be a bit of a harder sell than maybe the Jekyll and Hyde build, but I think by the time we're finished here, you will agree that this is a pretty decent way of doing it. We're going to start, so starting off as a monk, we're going to get access to Flurry of Blows, Unarmored Defense, which we actually will not be using for this build, as you can tell. Trust me, this will look more like Frankenstein when we get to the end, but we're also going to be able to make our monk attacks with Dexterity instead of Strength, but we are still going to be using Strength, as you can see here, as well as the fact that now our unarmed strikes are going to deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage, and we can also make unarmed strikes as a bonus action. Very, very fun starting class here. But you could start with our multi-class instead, which I will get into pretty much at level 2. So next up, our stats, and this is a bit of a weird one when it comes to stats. I wanted a lot of different stats for this build, so I kind of had to finagle things a little bit. Strength is at 16 as I want it to be our main attacking modifier. Dexterity is at 10 because despite being a monk, since we're not really using our unarmored defense here, because we are going to be a heavy armor character, we don't really need dexterity here. So I've put it at a 10, which is going to make us kind of like worse at initiative and stuff like that. But again, we are meant to be the big, not exactly quick brute. So I do think dexterity at 10 is going to do just fine for us here. Constitution is at 15. We're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. You already know which one it is. Intelligence is at 8. I'm not going to say Frankenstein is necessarily dumb. I believe in the original Carnation he actually did have quite a bit of intelligence. However, there's no real room for it on this build, so I did have to dump it. Wisdom is at 16. This is because we need it for our monk stuff, obviously. And Charisma is also at 8. As much as I don't like having stats at 8 in my builds usually, Charisma being at 8 does make sense here. Intimidation is the only skill check we would ever really want to make, I think, with this build using Charisma, and we have Thaumaturgy for that. So we're going to be just fine on that front, but this build isn't really meant to be the face of the party. That build's coming later. So, that is our stats. As for our skill proficiencies, it's entirely up to you. Karlach comes with the Outlander background, which is going to give us access to Athletics and Survival, which I think works fine for the build regardless. For your Monk starting proficiencies, there you have the options of Acrobatics, Stealth, History, Religion, and Insight. I've gone for Acrobatics and Insight, but Acrobatics probably doesn't really fit. I would say you could probably go with Stealth, History, or Religion. Entirely up to you. It doesn't really matter. Since we only have a small multi-class dip in this build, I'm actually going to show it off first, but in reality you probably want to make the level progression something like going to straight to level 5 of Monk for extra attack or something like that. However, I do just kind of want to show off the multi-class dip here right away, and it is Cleric. That may seem a bit strange, but trust me, it'll make sense in a minute. Cleric is going to give us a few things, and again, this is a Monk Cleric build, which is the reason I didn't do this build first, is because I didn't want it too close to the absolute build, but Cleric is going to give us a few different things here. Namely, it's going to give us some cantrips, which can help us out with some various skill checks. I do have the Mistress Spells mod, because it is available to everyone, so you can download that if you want to for this build, which would give you access to a few other spells, like Word of Radiance and Toll the Dead, and Toll the Dead would make sense, maybe a little bit of necrotic damage on this build would be fun, but I really only care about getting some of the kind of more defensive social cantrips here. We don't need Thaumaturgy because we have it as part of our racial abilities, so I'm going to go with Resistance to help with saving throws, Guidance to help with ability checks, and Blade Ward to give us resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage if we feel like we need it. We have a lot of stuff we can do with our bonus action and still be offensive, so that you may actually find that casting Blade Ward could be beneficial to you. Next up for our subclass, we are going to go with Tempest Domain. And you're probably thinking, why Tempest Domain? Well, Frankenstein has always had a bit of a thing about electricity. He was literally given life because of an electrical shock from a thunderstorm. That was part of Dr. Frankenstein's experiment. So, in fact, it's Frankenstein's monster. I keep saying Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein's monster, technically. Just so you know, I'm not completely illiterate. It is Frankenstein's monster. But I will keep saying Frankenstein because it's easier. So Frankenstein does have a bit of electricity kind of as part of his, like, being, right? It's just part of his identity. So I thought leaning into the lightning side of things while being this unarmed brute character could actually be really, really fun, and I know a lot of kind of different interpretations of Frankenstein have done this in the past, and I'm no different, but BG3 can bring it about in some pretty interesting and unique ways. With Tempest Domain, though, we are going to get access to a few things, like heavy armor proficiency and martial weapons. Again, we're not using martial weapons on this build, but we are using heavy armor, so I want to pick that up. So now we have access to all martial weapons and all armor, which is great. And with Tempest Domain, we're going to gain access to 3 domain spells: Thunderwave, Fog Cloud, and Zephyr Strike, which is again a new spell. We can't use Zephyr Strike, unfortunately, because it does require a weapon to use the attack, so we're not really going to get a lot of usage out of that unless you do decide to use a weapon, in which case, go nuts. I'm going to be focusing more on the lightning side of things, though, whereas my absolute build, which used a slightly different, slightly similar, I should say, class combination, which focused more on the thunder side of things, this build is going to focus more on the lightning side of things. So while I do like the idea of Thunder Wave being kind of like just a big brute force hit that just pushes enemies away, and I like the idea of Fog Cloud being that ominous mist that is associated just with horror films in general, and Zephyr Strike exists, I think overall this is quite a fun little kit to get at level 1, but of course the main thing I want from Tempest Domain here is Wrath of the Storm. As a reaction, strike back at an attacking creature, dealing 2 to 16 lightning damage or thunder damage, and the target takes half damage on a successful save. This basically just for us means that like we kind of get to play that gentle giant character. Like we are totally chill in reality unless someone attacks us first, in which they're automatically going to get clapped back by lightning. Next up for our deity, I mean, I don't know, guys. You guys will have to let me know what you think makes the most sense here. Tell you what, that can be our comment. That can be our YouTube algorithm engagement comment for the day. What deity do you think works for Frankenstein? I'm sure one of you will think of something. And I know someone's going to bring up deities, so I'm going to bring it up now. Yes, the deity build series is over. Yes, I know there are mods that add more deities to the game. No, I'm not doing them. So pick whoever you like. This guy has a lightning bolt. It's Talos. Maybe I'll remaster Talos soon. Anyways, abilities. We do get a couple from Cleric, so you get to kind of pick a few here. History and medicine. Medicine makes sense. We do know a doctor. Next up, for our prepared spells, we get access to a few. I like Sanctuary here just because it's an amazing utility spell that's going to help us out in a lot of ways. And again, at the end of the day, we are a gentle giant. We don't really want to hurt anybody, even if everybody else wants to hurt us. I would say also bring Command. Not to actually command people, but I do think the average commoner flees when they see you. So this could, again, be another, in a similar vein to Thaumaturgy, be a kind of unconscious casting of the spell. The next kind of couple can be whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. I like Shield just as a basic concentration spell here. We're not really going to be getting many of the powerful, or any of the powerful Cleric concentration spells, so just being able to slap this on you, giving you a +2 to your AC while you just do all your regular monk stuff, but doesn't require concentration in any shape or form, can actually be really nice to have. So just having a +2 to your AC at any point is pretty great. And finally, we're going to take Create or Destroy Water. This is a lightning build. We want to be able to do double damage on our lightning attacks, don't we? We are going to take the second level of Cleric here to give us access to our Channel Divinity, charges, and by extension, once per short rest use of Destructive Wrath, allowing us to deal lightning damage, whenever we deal lightning damage, we can spend our Channel Divinity to deal the maximum possible damage. This is going to synergize with some abilities that we're going to be getting later, so I feel like it's worth it to have. However, this isn't actually necessary for the build if you don't want to take this second level. There are a few things that are 1-level dips that could be useful here. Storm Sorcerer could be nice to have for the flying if you want to kind of get a bit more of a lightning-y feel. You could go for 1-level dip into Fighter if you want like Second Wind, or maybe like a fighting style if that's your fancy. There are a few different ways you could go about it, but I quite like taking the second level of Cleric here, because I don't really want to go to the 11th level of Monk, really, but you could if you wanted to. Next up for our race, we do get Searing Smite here. Can't really use it in this build, unfortunately. And we do get to prepare an extra spell at this level. Honestly, it's a pick your favourite situation. Let's go with Ceremony, because it's a new thing that we have. Might as well. And now we head back to Monk for the rest of the build. Again, you don't need to take those Cleric levels right away. You can kind of take them once you kind of got your full Martial kit online. But I like getting the Cleric level a little bit early because I do like having access to the Wrath of the Storm feature for that reaction-based attack. Because now we can do damage with our action, bonus action, and reaction, thanks to the Monk and Cleric mix, which is quite nice. Speaking of Monk, we now get access to Patient Defense and Step of the Wind Dash and Disengage. Patient Defense is probably going to be the one you use the most with this build. Attack rolls against you will have disadvantage, and you have advantage on dex saves at the cost of a key point and a bonus action. Really helps, because when I did my solo testing with this build, it did struggle a little bit defensively despite the fact that we have a decent chunk of HP, so Patient Defense is really going to help with that. As well as the fact that Step of the Wind Dash is going to have a pretty decent interaction on this build, which I'll explore more in the equipment section. Next up, at Monk level 3, we do get to choose our subclass, but first, we do gain access to Branding Smite, I should say, at this level, because we're a Azariel Tiefling. Can't really use it, though. Next up, subclass, and while I did go Way of the Open Hand in my last Monk build, we are going to be taking Way of the Four Elements. Now that we're kind of getting more used to this new body of ours, our Infernal engine has gone from being an Infernal engine to, I don't know, whatever the hell they put in a Prius, and we are now going to be able to channel electricity. This is going to allow us to do at least consciously. Before, with our Cleric levels, we were doing it unconsciously, just shooting off lightning as a reaction to being attacked, whereas now we can now channel it consciously. This is going to give us access to a few lightning-based attacks. First up, Touch of the Storm, but the target cannot use reaction, and the spell has advantage on creatures against metal armor. Basically, this is Shocking Grasp, but it costs us a key point, and it is not considered a spell, so no, and it doesn't get boosted up by spell boosting items, which is a bit of a shame. But this is cool because it also triggers our Unarmed Strike, so we can use these in place of regular attacks and not really lose our martial combo stuff. So doing a 1d10 of lightning damage, which will get bumped up as we level up, is pretty nice. Speaking of another elemental attack, we gain access to the sphere of elemental balance, allowing us to basically use chromatic orb for the cost of 2 key points. We can obviously do the lightning or thunder variants here, and obviously I'm mainly going to be sticking with the lightning. Getting a little lightning Hadouken is quite nice for a build like this, in my opinion, and it's entirely up to you what you kind of want to choose for your final spell. Obviously, we do have Fist of the Thor Thunders, which is like Thunder Wave, but we already have Thunder Wave, so I would say grab Fist of Unbroken Air. You just punch so hard that it creates an air-based projectile that does bludgeoning damage and can knock targets prone. Again, it kind of just leads more into that big brute energy we've got going on. Next up at Monk level 4, we're going to get access to Slowfall, giving us resistance to falling damage, which is nice. You can also replace a spell at any point if you, well, I say replace spell, it is replacing one of your monk abilities if you so choose. They're not actually considered spells in the game, but they are, but they're not. It's weird. But you can change those out every level, so if you feel like one isn't really working out for you, you do get to swap it out. But we do get to take a feat at this point, and of course we are taking Tavern Brawler and bumping up our constitution to a 16, giving us a decent chunk of HP by the time we're done with this build. Now, I would say that if you really wanted to maximize your damage here, you could go for the whole set, start with 17 strength and then bump that up with the half feat later, but I do feel like having this more rounded stat spread does help more, because taking that extra bit of offense means you do need to sacrifice something on the wisdom or the constitution side. Constitution obviously taking away from your defenses, and wisdom taking away from your ability to cast spells, or our monk feature in this case, our Way of the Four Elements stuff, which I feel like defeats the point of the build. So I think having a more rounded stat spread does work here. And again, if you take these monk levels first, you're not really going to be too worried about these stats in the early game. A 16 in both is pretty good, especially with Tavern Brawler, doubling our strength modifier added to the damage and attack rolls of unarmed strikes, improvised weapons, or throwing. And again, being able to use improvised weapons and throwing attacks does kind of make sense for a sad, scared, and confused big man. Or woman in this case. Monk level 5, extra attack. You already know how this goes, but we do gain access to Stunning Strike, which I love this feature now. I was iffy about it before because of how it kind of works in D&D, but I just love it here. I used it in the combat footage to great effect. I love Stunning Strike. Next up, at Monk level 6, you're going to gain Key Empowered Strikes, allowing your unarmed strikes to now overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. So you're going to be able to punch pretty hard, but also at this level you're going to gain access to another Way of the Four Elements feature, as well as the fact that now we get to choose a couple of new ones. We have Clench of the North Wind, Embrace of the Inferno, and Gong of the Summit. I don't really think any of these really fit the build, but since we do already have a version of Thunderwave on this character, I guess Gong of the Summit, you could kind of treat it like a thunderclap type deal, like you clap your hands and it creates like a sonic shockwave, a bit like the Hulk. It's another green man, okay? But honestly, the biggest power ability option here would be Clench of the North Wind, to just basically use Hold Person and gain all of your monk strikes, deal critical hits, which will obviously absolutely melt some humanoid enemies. Obviously that's a little bit less useful in the late game, but I mean, heck, it would certainly work on Gortash, and I think Karlach would like that very, very much. So, yeah, I mean, it's entirely up to you what you want to choose here. I do believe I used Gong of the Summit in my testing. Well, I say that, it didn't really come up very much. We're mainly here for the lightning stuff that we got kind of early on, because that definitely fits the build more, so feel free to experiment. At Monk level 7, we're going to gain access to Evasion, which is going to allow us to, whenever a spell or effect would deal half damage on a successful death save, it deals no damage if you succeed and half damage if you fail, so this does help with the tankiness of the build quite a bit. We're also going to gain access to Stillness of Mind, where if we are charmed or frightened, we automatically cast this feature to remove the condition, which again, I feel like makes sense for Karlach as well. At Monk level 8, we get to choose another feat, and this is where you need to have a bit of a think. In my testing, I bumped up my strength to 18 to increase our offensive power. Obviously, I would like to have both wisdom and constitution a bit higher, but we are going to be bumping up our constitution with our equipment, so it is a very solid number, and wisdom, you could do the Mirror of Loss or something. However, if you do want to get your strength to 18 without using this ability score improvement, take the Potion of Everlasting Vigor. It is optional, everything that we have here will still work quite well with the stats that we'll have by the end, which is what you see here. However, if you don't care about getting your strength stat to 20 and you're fine with it being 18, you can go with the Potion of Everlasting Vigor and put these points into Wisdom instead. That way you'll have an 18 in strength, 18 in constitution, and an 18 in wisdom, which is a very well-rounded ability set. It's entirely up to you, but in my testing I used this stat spread, and it worked out just fine. Again, this build is an offensive powerhouse, and is still pretty tanky. You just need to make sure that you're not going into encounters solo, like I do in my testing. Again, pair this up with my other Halloween builds, and have a pretty awesome October. At monk level 9, we're going to gain access to advanced unarmored movement, which we can't use, but also improved elemental casting. At this level, all of our 4 elements features now deal additional dice of damage, so everything just got a big damage buff. Clench of the North Wind can hold an additional creature, and Embrace of the Inferno fires an extra ray. So basically all of our spells are now upcast, but we don't actually have to use more resources to cast them, so it's quite cost efficient. Speaking of, we do get to pick another one, and at this point, take Clench of the North Wind. I made enough of a case for it already. You stole one of the Doctor's paralyzing elixirs or something, or hell, maybe good old Jekyll made it for you. Who knows? Again, these builds are meant to work together in a weird way. And finally, at monk level 10, you're going to gain access to Purity of Body. Kind of ironic for Frankenstein, but this means you are immune to poison damage and cannot be poisoned by disease. And I think that does make sense as a feature for Frankenstein to have, so we're going to have it here. But again, maybe you don't care so much about this 10th level of monk, but do know that this does help us bump up to the next set of damage die. But again, 1 level dips could work. There is a 1 level dip into Fighter or Sorcerer, like I said. Warlock could get you Eldritch Blast, not that you'd really be able to use it that well. Ranger could get you something like a stat resistance. Feel free to play around with this one, but I would definitely just say if you want a simple, effective build, 10 Monk, 2 Cleric. Maybe even 3 Cleric. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is an absolutely offensive powerhouse. I mean, a high-level monk is always going to be doing lots of damage between flurry of blows, extra attack, all that good stuff, but you do get a ton of versatility, being able to use lightning damage, and that'll work great with our equipment, like I'll get into in a minute, and thunder damage as well, or really damage of any type with Sphere of Elemental Balance to get over enemy resistances and really show your enemy what for. But also you have a ton of extra stuff to work with as well, a ton of utility. Sanctuary, one of the best utility spells in the game. You get all the fun social cantrips, so you can be a great support to the party. Credit Destroy Water is going to allow you to basically make all of your enemies who are wet take double damage from our electric stuff, which is awesome. And you do have some battlefield control in the form of command, even though it most likely won't be effective into the late game. And Shield of Faith is always just a great defensive buff to have. We also get Harmony of Fire and Water, forgot to mention this, but it does whenever we're not in combat. We can regain half of our key points rounded down once per long rest, so we do have more resource usage. At the end of the day, without the equipment that I'm about to talk about, you are a pretty powerful monk with some extra utility. Not too much to discuss here. Obviously, Tavern Brawler giving us a big damage buff as well. However, with the equipment, you do take this up to the next level. Let's get into the weapons. Let's get into the armor. So first up, we have the Helmet of Grit. Whenever the wearer has 50% less hit points, you gain an additional bonus action. As a monk, this is a very powerful feature. A lot of monks will take 3 levels of Thief Rogue just to get this. And obviously I haven't done that here, but this still gets us a bit of that flavor. It just means that when people really do start ragging on old Frankie here, and he gets angrier and angrier and angrier, and he eventually does lash out, he lashes out in a big way. Again, getting to that lower hit point threshold and being able to do 2 Flurry of Blows in one turn, maybe a Flurry of Blows and a bonus action attack, plus your 2 attacks with your main action, you'll be able to make a lot of attacks. If we were an open hand monk, we'd be able to do even more, but with the 4 elements, we're still going to get a lot out of this. Again, this is an Act 3 option. Again, it's going to take you a while to really learn to harness that anger. Accidentally made the Electric Hulk here, but let's not talk about that. First up, we have for our early game option, we have the Grim Skull Helm. Attackers can't land critical hits against you, and you gain resistance to fire damage, which we already had. But we also do gain access to Hunter's Mark, which does not fit the build at all, but getting that attackers cannot land critical hits is going to make us even more tanky. So if you feel like you want to go more into the defense than the offense, you might prefer the Grim Skull Helm overall. It's just a great early game armor piece anyway, but otherwise the Helmet of Grit is going to do the job. No cloak for this build, so slap on whatever you like. It can be whatever. Now, for our armor, we have the Dwarven Splint Mail. You take 1 less piercing damage, which is always nice. You gain a +1 bonus to strength saving throws and checks. You have disadvantage on stealth checks. We weren't exactly going to be stealthy anyway. And it gives you a +2 to Constitution. With a base 19 AC and a +2 to Constitution, you're coming out of this with exactly 111 HP, which makes my brain happy. 111. And combine this with Shield of Faith, and you can have a solid 21 AC. Which is really, really nice. I like this combo. I think it works great. Again, I don't care too much about our maneuverability. You could go for some sort of chicanery with Cloud, Giant Strength, Elixirs if you wanted to go with the unarmored defense and bump up your dexterity, but I quite like the setup that we have here. Next up, one of the main cornerstones of this build, the Sparkle Hands. On a hit with an unarmed attack, the wearer gains 2 lightning charges, and while you're imbued with lightning charges, attacks against metal constructs and foes wearing metal armor gain advantage. Yeah, this is how we do it. The more we attack, the more the electricity builds up in our body until it explodes with power. Because lightning charges allow lightning to course through you, giving you a +1 to your attack rolls, and you deal an additional 1 lightning damage. It basically turns your unarmed strikes, in this case, into +1 weapons, which I think is kind of interesting. And if you gain 5 charges of lightning charge, I guess, I don't know why I felt the need to repeat myself, they are consumed, and then the next time you deal damage, you deal an additional 1d8 lightning damage. You do lose 1 charge per turn, but obviously with the Sparkle Hands on a fully powered monk, you're going to reach those charges pretty quickly, so you're just going to be dealing a massive amount of extra damage every turn with a higher chance to hit. And against metal constructs and foes wearing metal armor, you're going to be gaining advantage on those strikes. Overall, pretty damn impressive. However, we can combine this with either the Water Sparklers or the Speedy Light Feat. The Water Sparklers allow you to become, whenever you stand on a water surface during combat, it will become electrified, electrocuting surrounding enemies and dealing lightning damage to them. And if the wearer starts their turn on an electrified surface, which again, those water surfaces that we electrify will count, you gain 3 lightning charges immediately, meaning you just get to pow, pow, pow with lightning charges over and over and over again, or shocking enemies around you. However, if you don't feel like the water setup really makes sense for this build lore-wise, then just grab the Speedy Light Feat so that whenever you dash or take a similar action during combat, you immediately gain 3 lightning charges. With potentially 2 bonus actions thanks to the Helmet of Grit, it does cost a little bit of key points, but you could dash twice, immediately gaining 6 lightning charges, which is pretty damn powerful. That can immediately trigger an extra 1d8 of lightning damage. But normally you're just going to be cycling through getting that extra damage, usually with this combo with Create and Destroy Water to create those watery surfaces, and just being able to do a massive amount of extra damage between lightning charges and Tavern Brawler, absolutely mowing down enemies, and then when necessary, using the Sphere of Elemental Balance or the Touch of the Storm combined with Destructive Wrath from Tempest Cleric to really just do a massive damage attack. So again, you make your enemy wet, you hit them with your biggest lightning attack that you can do, and then bing bang bosh, you use Destructive Wrath to make it so that they get absolutely nuked. Now, obviously, we're not going to be hitting the same heights of damage that maybe a Tempest Cleric Storm Sorcerer would be able to, but this is still a fun and unique way of doing it, which I quite like. For our accessories, we have access to the Sentient Amulet, giving us access to Shatter and Key Restoration. And I quite like getting the Sentient Amulet on this build. I mean, obviously it gives us Shatter, which is kind of on theme for the build. I made a justification for it earlier. And Key Restoration just means, in addition with Harmony and Fire and Water, we just basically have a massive amount of key points per long rest, which is great. I do think the side quests, though, would be quite interesting for a Frankenstein-esque character, because imagine the only friend that Frankenstein makes is a crazy ghost that tries to goad him into doing things. It could be an interesting questline to follow for this build, so I thought I would include it here, but really any amulet you fancy will work. Next up, 2 pretty standard rings for this kind of setup. We have the Shadow Cloaked Ring, dealing an extra 1d4 damage with armor and arm strikes against lightly or heavily obscured creatures or creatures made of shadow. Basically, if a character is standing in slight shade, whether it be from a building or if you're just inside a building, this will go off. So it's basically free damage a lot of the time. And the Sparks Wall, basically required, because when we create these electrocuted surfaces, we too could be electrocuted if we don't have this ring. This gives us immunity to being electrocuted and resistance to lightning damage. Kind of felt like we needed resistance to lightning damage on this one, it just makes too much sense. And all in all, this gives us 3 resistances: fire, lightning, and complete poison immunity, which I think is just awesome for this build. Again, there is further optimization you could do here. There is the bump to strength with the Potion of Everlasting Vigor. You could bump another stat with, like, the Mirror of Loss. There are a few things you could do if you want to delve into the deeper mechanics of the game and the quest lines in order to make this character as optimal as you can. But otherwise, I do think we have a pretty interesting and fun kind of idea here. Is it my strongest build in terms of, like, creativity? Maybe not, but I do think it is a fun way of kind of embodying a Frankenstein-esque character. Some of you may think that, like, hey, where's the level of barbarian that gets us rage? I mean, come on, it's Karlach Frankenstein, and is that they're a big monster, surely that you make them rage. That's not really what old Frankenstein was about. Again, a lot of people, I think, again, I kind of brought this up in the Jekyll and Hyde video, that really, I kind of was, you know, doing a disservice to the character, including Barbarian, even though it was the best way to kind of show the split personality in the game mechanically, and it did work for the build. That's not really what Mr. Hyde was. And again, Frankenstein himself isn't actually meant to be a big, brutish, violent monster. That's kind of the whole point of the book. Is that he isn't actually that. That's just what everyone perceives him as. So I didn't feel like Barbarian made sense on this build, so I didn't want to just do that and call it a day, make another Barbarian 4 Elements Monk. That's already my Karlach origin build that I made way back in the day. So I feel like with this build that's kind of explores those themes in a slightly more subtle way, again, I made my justifications throughout the video, I really do like this build from a mechanical perspective, as well as, you know, how it works in game kind of for the character. And again, it's kind of like dressing up as Frankenstein. It's not that exactly. So I don't know, I'm really happy with how this build turned out overall, and I think you guys like it as well. For the camp clothing I'm wearing to get this look, you need the casual coat from the Citizens Camp Clothing mod, again available on console, with the Faerunian Colours mod, with the Ao, or Ao, or however the God of all gods is pronounced, their dye, which is kind of like, you know, this blackish dye. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'm going to be coming up with more October builds as we go on, including testing some modded subclasses. I think the Astarian one you guys are going to find quite interesting, because of course I'm doing Dracula. What the hell did you think I was going to do? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly trying to... I'm not always trying to pull the wool over your eyes and say, hey, look, I did this thing that you didn't expect. No, Astarian is Dracula. But I am going to take some inspirations from some interesting places for that one, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, I am all out of time. I've got places to be, so I'm going to end this video here. Thank you all so much for watching, and goodbye.